see, we have some bro science a little bit later as it relates to this, because we're going to talk about training. Okay, so adaptations to aerobic training. Okay, and we're going to do very much the same thing that we did with resistance training. We're going to talk a little bit of our way through how should we train, right? Just like what I asked you guys to do on Monday, we're going to go now, right? And you got to go off and run. Some of y'all, I'm not doing y'all's program, right? My old sedentary, out of shape ass. What are we going to go do today and tomorrow and next week and the week after? So what should we be doing? We'll then get into a little bit of, if I do this training and I do it consistently, what's going to change? Okay. I had you guys start kind of talking about that in your groups on Monday. Most of y'all did a very reasonable job at trying to identify some of those things. Okay. So what is it that's going to change? So it's going to be stuff that's going to help us. It's going to help us with the VO2 max. It's going to help us from a metabolic standpoint. Okay. And then we'll just very briefly, we're going to do a little bit less with this than we did with resistance training, but we'll try to talk about what's the stimulus. Okay. If I tell you that you go and walk today for most of y'all, then it's not going to make you more fit. Okay. It's because you are lacking with walking. You're not getting the right stimulus. Okay. Now, if I go and I walk, it might work. It might be enough of a stimulus for me. But if I do that consistently within a couple of weeks, it's probably not going to be. So we'll talk a little bit about what is that? How do we arrive at determining what that needs to be so that you guys can figure out in your own lives when you do things, is it working? Okay, or not? Okay. So why do we train? Okay. Just like we talked about with resistance training, most people, okay, most people are going to approach aerobic training, running, biking, swimming, something like that, for a couple of reasons. Potentially to increase exercise performance, okay? And that may not necessarily mean, right, I'm going to be a better athlete or that I'm training to be, right, a marathon runner or anything like that. It may very simply just be, I want to be able to do a 5K. I want to be able to do a 10K. I want to be able to, right, if you're an older individual, say like you're my mom, I want to be able to go and walk around the zoo with Ellis for a few hours without it being incredibly terrible. Okay. OKC Zoo, surprisingly hilly. If you have not go push a dead weight child in a stroller around who refuses to walk or wants to be carried, and you'll figure that out pretty quickly. Okay. And so as it relates to performance, people are generally thinking like VO2 max, mile running time, something like that. They might also be thinking about lactate threshold, other things that are going to contribute here. The other big thing, and if we take a lot, not a lot of other things out of class, it should be this. Hopefully you got this from Principles of Health and Fitness. Of all of the things that exist that are predictive of mortality, it is low aerobic fitness. Okay. Low aerobic fitness, low VO2 max, you will die sooner. And before you die, your quality of life will be worse. The single most important thing that we can do to prevent cardiovascular disease, type 2 diabetes, certain kinds of cancer, all of these chronic health problems is to train aerobically, be active aerobically, and do what we can to either increase or preserve VO2 max. Okay. Resistance training is great. Strength is great. Okay. We should be doing both of the two. If you've only got to do one, VO2 max is the thing. Okay. So people are training, they want to be healthier. Okay. And this is not like silly, ridiculous Instagram, right? TikTok, right? Which for people listening, none of you actually watch on the university Wi-Fi, right? You'll never do that. Okay. Of course not, because we're not supposed to. You guys know that, right? We're not supposed to get on TikTok because the Chinese government is stealing all of our information, and it's all a plot, according to some people who shall remain nameless. Okay. when we think about training, this is going to get us back to our stimulus, okay? In order to get adaptations, we have to overreach, we have to tax our physiological systems in a way that we normally don't. And much like with resistance training, when we said we wanted to train to failure, the thing that limits performance on running or walking a mile, a 5K, a 10K, whatever it is fatigue. Okay, it's fatigue. Could be central, could be peripheral, likely is some combination of both. So we need to train to induce fatigue so that we can drive adaptations that will limit fatigue the next time we do something, right? How do we get fatigue? We'll get into that, right? We've already talked about some of that. That was on your last test, okay? But that's going to be the big thing that limits performance, okay? Hydrogen ions, lactic acid. Substrate depletion, so depleting glycogen, blood glucose, creatine phosphate, probably not fat, ever going to deplete fat. And then our ability to deliver. So that combination of stuff that we spent the last month talking about are going to contribute here. So if we want adaptation, we train, we get fatigue, or you exercise today, you induce this fatigue, we're going to drive adaptations that are going to hopefully limit this. There may be changes in the muscle. Okay, there may be changes in the metabolic system. Admittedly, the metabolic system is also in the muscle. So I probably need to go back and rejigger how I'm explaining these things, right? There may be changes in the cardiovascular system. There are likely not very many, but you could get a little bit of something in the respiratory system. Okay. Realistically, with aerobic training, most of our fatigue is coming from not a lack of oxygen, but an inability for the muscle to either use the oxygen that we can deliver to it, or a little bit of a mismatch in our ability to get as much oxygen there as we need to maintain aerobic metabolism. Okay, we'll dig into this. This is what we're doing. Okay. So hopefully what you guys can see that I'm driving at from a how should we train? If you need to go and train today, what should you do? How do you induce fatigue today? What should you do? I say go run now. Derek, what should you do? How far should you run to induce fatigue? Till I can't anymore. Oh God. Okay. It's not very far from me, right? How intense should it be? Joey?
It could be either intense or not very intense, just as long as it's at moderate intensity.
It could be, I mean, if it is at moderate intensity, then it could not also be at a high intensity, right? But I mean, does that play some role in how long I can go? Okay. Matt?
Are we sticking specifically to aerobic metabolism, or are we just going straight to fatigue, pretty much just trying to see how fast we can fatigue?
So this is a great question. So there's this interaction. Let me clarify this, okay, before you go on. So this is probably going to be a good thing. If I told you we were going to sprint today, okay, would you think that that sprinting would improve your aerobic metabolism? If you just went and sprinted 100 meters once, or is that going to make your VO2 max go up? Probably not. Okay, so there's this interaction. We need to be, in theory, we need to, in some instances, accumulate these hydrogen ions, which means it needs to be intense, which means we have to work our anaerobic metabolism. But remember, we only use anaerobic when aerobic is not sufficient, or when we are doing work that aerobic cannot match all of the ATP that we need. So by necessity, if it is difficult and we're having to use anaerobic, that also means that we are likely really taxing our aerobic metabolism, because if we weren't, then we would not have to then call on anaerobic on top of it. Does that idea make sense, guys? Right? I'm walking. I don't need to use anaerobic other than at the very start because my aerobic can match everything. When I jog, though, me jogs, not you guys. I jog, then I start having to use some anaerobic because I'm woefully out of shape. Okay. For some of y'all, maybe you got to jog fast. And so there's just going to be this delicate balance that we're going to get here between all of this. But we have to make the cardiovascular system work hard, which means high cardiac output, high heart rate, max out stroke volume. Okay. And we have to make the metabolic system, we have to make the mitochondria work hard, which means it needs to be enough so that we're right at that sort of tipping point between aerobic can meet everything and anaerobic's going to have to start adding some more time. Okay. Does that idea make sense? Okay. That's what we're going to try to get to. So we'll try to point some of this stuff out. Okay. And that is going to get us our stimulus. Okay. That's going to get us our stimulus. You have to overload just like what we did with resistance training. If walking is easy, run or jog. If jogging for 10 minutes is easy, jog for 15. If 15 is easy, jog for 20, etc., etc., etc. Okay. Whatever you're doing, do more. Go longer, do an extra day per week, make it more at a higher intensity. The other thing to keep in mind is this idea of specificity. Remember, resistance training, specificity is all about neural adaptation. If you want to get better at squatting, squat. If you want to get better at bench pressing, bench, right? It's Wednesday. It'll be second bench press day, second chest day for the bros this week. When we do aerobic training, this idea is going to be a little bit trickier, a little bit wonkier, okay? If you want to get better at running, run. If you want the things in your legs to improve, you got to run. If you're like, but Dr. Black, if I bike, I'm also using my legs, right? Is there not some transfer of all of that? And the answer is no. There's not. Unless you're super duper unfit. Biking doesn't make you better at running. It makes you better at biking. Okay. Running doesn't make you better at biking. Same kind of thing. My dad likes to talk about, my dad's a marathon runner, the former marathon runner, who now bikes, and he complains when he bikes, he can't get his heart rate up enough on things. So I just sort of roll my eyes at with all of this. He likes to talk about that Lance Armstrong said, you know, he used to ride all the time, and then he like ran the New York Marathon or something. So that running the marathon was way harder than any of the biking stuff that he did. And I was like, Dad, that's because he quit doping, right? Like he's not doping now, so the running is actually harder in those ways, but they're very different things. You can be super fit at one thing and have a very high VO2 max, but it won't always translate to the other. Okay. So to overload our system, we're going to have to increase work. We're defining aerobic work as intensity or sort of the metabolic cost multiplied by duration multiplied by frequency, right? So I'm at 50% of VO2 max, 3 days per week for a half an hour. Okay. So I can increase any of these things and it will hopefully let me overload, right? More work, more fatigue, makes our various systems work harder. That's how we're going to get, we're going to get better stuff. Okay. Okay. I'm going to say this and then y'all are going to look at me like I'm a weirdo. And then we're going to say, yes, but this is what the research tells us. Okay. Of the things to change when you train to impact purely the amount you can increase your VO2 max, the single most important parameter of your workout today is intensity. We define intensity as the percentage of VO2 max at which you are working today. Okay. For most of you guys, intensity needs to be at least at 50%, potentially a little bit above 50% of VO2 max, or you're not going to work the aerobic metabolic systems enough to get them to adapt and drive an increase in VO2 max. Of all the things you can do, intensity is the most important. Okay, so when in doubt, go hard. Sucks, right? That's really difficult from an adherence standpoint. It's really difficult from a motivational standpoint when you go today. But of all the things, when in doubt, run up a hill, run faster, bike at a higher resistance. Okay, that's the most important. Duration matters to a point. At the same intensity, the longer you go, you'll get more adaptations, up to about 40 minutes of exercise time. Beyond 40 minutes, no real further increases in VO2 max. So an hour is not necessarily, from a VO2 max improvement standpoint, better than a half an hour or better than 40 minutes. An hour and a half, not better. Okay. Similarly, the frequency of the number of days per week that you train, an additional day is better. So 2 days is better than 1, 3 better than 2, up to about 5 days per week. A 6th and a 7th day does not seem to get us anything extra. Okay. So if your goal is to improve VO2 max, up to about 40 minutes, up to about 5 days per week, everything else is basically intensity. Okay. No one trains like this. If you are sort of an elite level distance athlete, track athlete, swim, like whatever it is, nobody trains like this. And they get mad when I'm like, why? Why not? If you're a OU cross country runner and your race is 5 kilometers, it's 5K. And yet you train by running 100 miles per week, and you go on the weekend and you run 12 miles. Why? What are you doing? Right? And so here, your race lasts 18 minutes or 16 minutes. Why are you running for an hour and a half? Right? It needs to be here. There's other things. And so it's more complicated than this if you're an elite level. But I like this because you don't have to go for a super long time. You don't have to go every day of the week. Rest days are good. But to maximize things, you probably do have to push pretty hard. You need to go pretty hard. You need to go. Okay. If we purely want to increase this. And we know, as I mentioned the other day, that in the absence of duration, if we make intensity really, really high, and we can get to about 30 seconds in about, you can do high intensity interval training and get the intensity is so important that it will drive most of the same adaptations. Okay. Anybody live in Walker when you were a freshman? You guys ever elevator ever broken? You guys ever had to walk up the stairs? There's a study by probably the most well-respected interval training expert in the world. He's at McMaster University in Canada. And they did a thing where they had freshmen run up the stairs in the freshman dorms. Okay. For 20 seconds. Sprint up the stairs for 20 seconds. Rest for a minute. Sprint up the stairs for 20 seconds again. Do 3 of those 3 times per week. And they got these, like massive improvements in VO2 max. It doesn't take that long, but stairs fucking suck, right? So if it's high enough, you really tax your metabolic systems, you really drive heart rate and cardiac output up. And so this is the thing, though. Intensity is really, really important. Okay? Intensity is really important. Okay, so how should we train? Most of you guys did well with this on Monday, right? Look at what I've got here, and it's going to look very similar to what most of you guys had. You've got to overload the system to start with. We're going to do that generally by doing rhythmic movements with large muscle groups. You're like, Dr. Black, what the hell is that? Running, walking, biking, okay? Get on the cross-country skiing ergometer if you want on all of that, okay? Go put the roller skates or the roller blades on. Ellis has roller skates. She's trying to roller skate in our house and she keeps falling on her ass. And then she gets really pissed and then doesn't want to do it and then wonders why she doesn't get better. Like we got her roller skates and she thought like, I am gonna be, I don't know, like awesome right from the jump. And then it was very disappointing for her. On those things, okay? 50 to 100% of VO2 max, 20 to 45 minutes, 3 to 5 days per week. If you look at this, this is the American College of Sports Medicine training recommendations that you guys learned in personal training, in endurance training, in principles of health and fitness, right? They didn't arrive at those things like arbitrarily. There's a reason, and it's because this is what works, okay? This is what works. When in doubt, raise the intensity, lower the duration if you need to, okay? 2 to 3 days per week. The days per week is probably pretty important. Continuous exercise and interval exercise both work. Fascinating evidence. They thought this would give people to exercise more. It's not worked because we're genetically programmed to sit on our asses, basically. And now we have TikTok and things like that. So why would you ever want to go outside and do things when you can just sit on your phone? But get up in the morning, go run for 10 minutes. At lunch, go run for 10 minutes. In the evening, go run for 10 minutes. Compare that to 30 minutes all at once at the exact same pace, same adaptations. Same adaptations. And the thought was, everybody's got 10 minutes in the morning, right? Not if you have a small child, you sure as shit don't. But, right, everybody, you can do 10 minutes here and 10 minutes there. And then 10 minutes in the evening, it's less intimidating, right? Seems great. Tests wonderfully when you survey people. Nobody does. Okay? But you get the same adaptation. And what we take from that is it's that total work is the key. It's that intensity by sort of duration or distance or whatever all put together. You just need basically to do that much metabolic work, and that will help to drive things. So think about that as we go. Joe.
Is there an effect if you were to work out or like run after you can do big resistance training?
No. Well, I mean, you're gonna be unhappy. You'll change your fuel utilization in that way. In a lot of instances, then what's gonna happen is the resistance training, we have evidence, because it was a thing that I was very interested in, that you've resistance trained, let's say you've done some heavy stuff, you've done squats or something, and you've induced muscle damage because of all of that. Now your maximal strength goes down, your VO2 max goes down. And so now whatever you were going to run at is actually at a higher, what you ran at yesterday before you were damaged, right, was at 60% of VO2 max. Now because you're damaged, the VO2 max has gone down. Now you're at 75%, and so it's more intense. And this, now, does that matter when you train? We've not gotten to that place in our research yet with those things. My sense is that it's going to make your VO2 max go down. So anything you're doing is going to be a higher relative percentage. And so as long as you can get through it, that's going to be good. But you may want to think about actually dialing like your pace and things down a little bit. I don't know.
So it makes more sense to do aerobic training before.
It makes more sense to do whatever thing you care about the most first, right? If the thing you really want to mess with is strength, do your strength training first. If the thing you really care about is endurance stuff, then do that first and then do your weights after, right? So if you want to be like a competitive, like a cross-country runner or on the track team or something, you should run first and we'll lift after. But if you want to be a power lifter, then lift first, and then you want to go do aerobic stuff, great, do that second, right? And we're not going to talk about, there's some evidence that there's a little bit of interference when you're doing both at the same time on all of that. It's not nearly as pronounced as we used to think. Mostly what happens is just that when you do one before the other, you can't work quite as hard on the second thing, and it's that limiting from that limits your potential gains. Okay, good question. And then you have to progressively overload. Like everything else, when it becomes easy, make it hard again. Okay? When it becomes easy, make it hard again. I'm sure none of y'all have ever done this in your entire life. I used to see it much more often, right? I would go to the Huff, And generally it was ladies. I see plenty of dudes that don't work hard enough. We'll get them, but like ladies on the treadmill or on the Stairmaster, talking on the phone. Nope. Nope. You can talk on the phone while you're doing your aerobic exercise, work harder. Right? Also, what's the sideways up the Stairmaster? I don't get that one either. Anybody done that one? You know, like, oh shit, I'm not gonna say that. If you have, come tell me why you were doing it, because I don't understand. Just like doing these things, it's not making these go away. Not doing it. That's gonna make them bigger. You're gonna increase muscle. Like doing all that. Okay. Doesn't work. Sorry, can't spot reduce. Hate to be the one to break things. So when you go, work hard. Right? Work hard. Okay. Now, let's talk about what actually changes, okay? So we got to think about this in the context of fatigue. All adaptations are likely going to occur to prevent fatigue. So most of our fatigue is going to come from the increase in acidity, from the accumulation of lactic acid, okay? And it's likely going to come from an inability of the mitochondria to make enough ATP. So our adaptations are gonna be working in those two primary areas. Okay. So if we look at anaerobic metabolism, we look at glycolysis, the glycolytic pathways or the creatine phosphate pathways, there are basically no adaptations that occur there. None. Right? None. The only thing that changes is you get a dramatic increase in the enzyme called hexokinase, which if you all remember, hexokinase is the enzyme that puts a phosphate on glucose when it first gets, it's the first step in glycolysis. That goes through the roof. Everything else in glycolysis, all the enzymes and things, they all say basically the same. There's really no adaptations of glycolytic metabolism. We're going to affect aerobic stuff. And by doing that, then it's going to let us pull more pyruvate over into the Krebs cycle and have less of it go into lactate. Okay. So the vast majority of things are going to occur that are going to help us over here. Okay. It's going to help us. I know that will seem backwards because you're going to think, but if we do a thing and I make less lactic acid, am I slowing this down? Is something going on here? No, it's all here so that more of the pyruvate that comes through glycolysis ends up in the Krebs cycle. That's the vast majority of what's going to happen. Okay. Okay. So this is just sort of a little bit of a thing about glycolytic stuff, right? Very mixed changes in PFK, okay, in the rate limiting enzyme. Most of the changes that are going to occur are because we're altering ATP and ADP levels, so really not much going on there. Huge increase in hexokinase. LDH, very, very limited. Any of the changes in LDH may be a result simply of just going from type 2X fibers to type 2A. We don't see a lot of change in LDH in the 2As and in type 1s. There's not a lot happening. The functional adaptations, especially of hexokinase, is that we may use more blood glucose to derive energy so we can spare glycogen. None of these things specifically really help us make less lactate. That's really going to be driven by the aerobic side. Okay. So there's not much in glycolysis that's changing. Okay. Going to seem very backwards. Okay. All the things that happen with aerobic training, likely the biggest thing from a muscle standpoint that happens is you get more mitochondria. Okay. Those of you that are reasonably sedentary like me, we start training in about 12 weeks, you can double the amount of mitochondria in your muscle fibers. Double. The ones you have also get bigger. So we go from 1 to 2, and the 2 are bigger. Okay. So remember how we talk about all of this. Okay. That I have pyruvate. And remember, it can go, okay, this one sucks. Krebs is here, lactate is here, right? I've got pyruvate. If Krebs has to occur in a mitochondria, there's a certain probability that this pyruvate will come into contact in that mitochondria where I've got one. Oh, look, now I have two. I've now doubled the chance that any pyruvate molecule will be able to go into the Krebs cycle. Okay, double, 100% more chance. Okay, and that's the big thing. And so as it can come this direction, then less of it will go to be lactate. Okay, double, huge, massive increases. Because mitochondria is where the Krebs cycle takes place. So if mitochondria double, we double all of our Krebs cycle enzymes, we double our capacity to make carbon dioxide, all of that. We double the electron transport chain components, we double, right, our ATP synthase enzymes. So we have essentially, right, we've doubled all of our capacity to make ATP. And if I can make ATP here, then I don't have to go the other direction. Okay. Now, there's going to be a small other component, right, that we're going to have to be able to get oxygen into all of this. So we're going to talk about some of our cardiovascular adaptations a little bit later, because I can do this. In some of you, I can double your mitochondria, but if you can't get more oxygen to those mitochondria, it doesn't do us any good to have them. Okay, so there's going to be some cardiovascular adaptations that will occur in concert. They're going to allow us to make use of this. Okay. All right, you guys with me so far? This happens in all fiber types. It happens in type 1 fibers. It especially happens in type 2A fibers. Okay. In type 2A fibers. Okay. Here are some data. I'm only going to show this to you guys because it's just the thing that backs all of this up. But this was a paper published in 1967 by, a biochemist. All physiology is biochemistry. I'm on a search committee in biological sciences looking for an ecological physiologist, which I have no idea what that is still. And we were having our meeting the other day, and like half of the applicants have PhDs in biochemistry. And there was an argument about if you're a biochemist, are you a physiologist? And I was like, guys, like all of physiology basically is just biochemistry, right? Like it's all biochemistry. Anyway, this was done in mice. This was the first time that they had ever figured out, okay, the 60s, which I know is a long time ago now for you guys. But that mitochondrial content goes up. And the mitochondrial content goes up. So you can just see it was about 3, it went up to 4.5. They put these little mice on a treadmill and they make them run on the treadmill. And if they don't want to run, at the back of the treadmill is an electrical grid. And if they stop running, they slide backwards and it shocks their tail. So they just run. And they run and they run and they run. Right? We do terrible things to animals in the name of science, and a lot of it is actually necessary, but it's still gets money. Okay, so we have all of that. 12 weeks. Oh, I'm sorry, it was rats. Not that that makes it that much better. Ellison today, she wants a pet rat, and I was like, "What? What's a pet rat?" Anyway, then it was she wants a panda for Christmas. So I don't know. Maybe we'll get her a rat and paint it black and white and call it a panda. It's a panda rat or something. I don't really understand. Okay. Anyway, they increased speed in bout length over 12 weeks. They got this ginormous increase in mitochondrial proteins. You can see cytochrome oxidase, right? So this is one of the electron transport chain enzymes. Succinate oxidase. This is a thing in the Krebs cycle, right? You'll see how much these things are going to go up. They've got the gastroc, they've got the soleus in these. You're going to get them everywhere. So this was the first time anybody had ever really observed these kinds of things. Okay. So what I'm going to show now is a little bit of the molecular stuff that goes into, this is great, you get more mitochondria, but how, right? But how? And how is that related to the way that we train or that we need to train? Okay. The process of making more mitochondria is called mitochondrial biogenesis. Okay. Mitochondrial biogenesis. And so mitochondria have their own genes. Did you guys say we've talked about this? Your mitochondria have a separate set of genes and DNA from the rest of the cells in your body. Your mitochondrial DNA came from your mother. Okay. It is passed down on the X chromosome. Okay, we used to imagine, or that mitochondria used to be single-celled organisms that existed by themselves. That's why they have their own set of DNA. But we have to essentially turn on mitochondrial DNA, activate their genome to get them to make new ones. And that has to be done in combination with genes being turned on, regular muscle fiber genes being turned on as well. So you got to have both, okay, to be able to initiate the making of new mitochondria. So what I'm going to show you, what I'm going to tell you is a very simplistic take on all of this, okay? There is a mitochondrial biogenesis sort of central signaling molecule that we're going to assume is very much like mTOR for the growth of skeletal muscle. And it is called PGC1 alpha. That stands for peroxisome proliferator activated receptor gamma coactivator. Okay, yeah. So PGC1 alpha. This is the kind of central signaling molecule that when we activate PGC1 alpha, right, that is going to be the thing that gets us activation of the mitochondrial genes and activation of the muscle fiber genes. They're going to work together to help us make more mitochondria. Okay. And the thing that we know that seems to drive mitochondrial biogenesis is exercise intensity, making the mitochondria work hard, okay, pushing them to the place where they're getting close to there not being enough oxygen to run the electron transport chain properly seems to play some role in activating PGC1 alpha. Okay, so here is messenger RNA content of PGC1 alpha in before training and after training. You'll see that this PGC1 alpha concentration goes up about 200%. So exercise training drives this increase in PGC1 alpha, which then drives the increase in mitochondria. This is messenger RNA. This is actual protein content. So this is the thing that tells us to make more PGC1 alpha. This is actual PGC1 alpha content in the muscle. We could spend an entire day talking about the differences between these two things and the cell things, but I want you guys to assume they're the same thing. It's just showing us that before training, here's after training. You will note there are these significant increases in PGC1 alpha in type 1 fibers. Look at this ginormous increase in PGC1 alpha in type 2A fibers. Okay. 2As are where we're going to make up the fast increase in mitochondria. Okay. Very little is significant, but a very small change in 2X's. But this big increase in PGC1 alpha in the 2As tells us that we're telling 2A fibers to make more mitochondria, which is going to be of great benefit to us somewhere down the road. Okay. You do not have to know any of the signaling pathway. I just wanted to present a little bit of it for you, like we did with mTOR, so I can say making mitochondria is fucking complicated. Okay, there's a lot of signals that are all going to come in here, but again, here's PGC1 alpha, right? It's getting turned on by something called AMP kinase, which is turned on during exercise as you make a bunch of ATP turnover. That activates this, right? That drives these other things that then drive all of this stuff to get turned on in the mitochondria to make more mitochondria. There may also be some activation of PGC1 alpha from calcium, okay? And then there's this interaction between you're cold or you fast, you don't eat enough food, that does some other things. There's all of this kind of interaction stuff. But the big thing basically is exercise turns on PGC1 alpha, and that gets us more mitochondria. Okay. Okay. Why will having more mitochondria limit fatigue? It's biochemistry. Very simple biochemistry. It's just what I drew here. It increases the sensitivity of the metabolic system. We define sensitivity in this instance, right, as how probable is it that a reaction will take place? Okay, when I have twice the mitochondria, any amount of pyruvate that I have now is more likely to go that way. Any free fatty acids that are coming out of the blood and going into the mitochondria have a greater chance of interacting and doing things. That makes the sensitivity go up. Okay. There's a greater chance that something's going to happen. More enzymes, greater chance for reactions to take place. So we can have more pyruvate that goes into the Krebs cycle, we'll make less lactic acid. That's the big thing. Okay. Do we need to draw enzyme kinetics? You guys want me to draw a Michaelis-Menten plot and we can talk about all of those things? Emily does. She's like, yes, do it. Yes. Again, it was sort of a seminal moment in about 1980 when the exercise physiologists who generally weren't biochemists were like, oh God, having more just means that things go better, right? And the biochemists were like, yeah, we've known this for like however long. This is enzyme kinetics from the 1890s or something. If anybody cares, I can send you papers on that. The other piece here, okay, the other piece and how this limits fatigue. Okay. People that are better aerobically trained derive more energy from fat at all times than people that are less trained. Okay. What you should have heard me say was, if I train, I can eat more Doritos. Okay. I can have more milkshakes or Chick-fil-A or whatever it is that is your particular vice. Okay. I derive more from free fatty acids. If I get more energy from fat, I do not use blood glucose. I do not use muscle glycogen. I do not make lactic acid. All three of those things are things that lead to fatigue. Okay. So you're better at rest and you're better everywhere else. It spares glycogen, it spares blood glucose, and you make less lactic acid. That's one of the other big things. Okay. All right. So remember, I told you guys we're going to put this here. You can argue about if it's a muscle adaptation or if it's really a cardiovascular adaptation. But the other thing that corresponds to what happens here in the muscle is I double mitochondria. I also start increasing the number of capillaries that go to that particular muscle fiber. Okay, that go to that fiber. We call that capillary density, capillaries per fiber size. Okay, that allows more blood to make it to that muscle fiber. It also means that more blood that has fat and glucose and oxygen is in closer proximity to every place, basically, on that fiber. Okay, it's like having, anybody live in an apartment where you have like a window unit or a house and you only have a window unit like for heat or air or something, right? If you're way far away from the window unit, it's not as cold, it's not as cool, it's not as warm. If you're in here and there's like 7 vents, right? Everybody is in much closer proximity to where the cool air is. It's easier to get cool air to the entirety of the room and keep it cooled down if there's more vents because we're all closer. It doesn't have to diffuse as far. Whereas if there's just one, it's way over there, right? Our folks on the side of the room are not going to be nearly as cool. That's kind of the idea of capillary density. It reduces the distance of diffusion to any place in the muscle fiber. So again, it's biochemistry. It's more likely that something will make it in and get used. Okay. Joey, somebody had a question. Yeah.
How do the capillaries get there?
How do they get there?
Do they just like pop up?
Yes, they literally just pop up. Again, we activate genes that say undergo angiogenesis, right? Make new blood vessels.
And so do they stay after?
Yes, they do. They stay. They will eventually go away, but they will stay. They will stay. Okay. Once you get mitochondria and capillaries, they will stay around for a while. They will eventually, if you don't stop them, they will eventually, sort of, they're not used, kind of go away, but they will stay around. Yes. Right. So the combination of those two things is very, very powerful for increasing VO2 max. Okay. A consequence that we talk about as a metabolic adaptation. A consequence of more mitochondria and more capillaries is we make less lactate. So lactate threshold as a percentage of your VO2 max is going to increase. So let me try to draw this in a way that I hope will make sense to you guys. Okay. So here you guys are. There's your VO2 max. Okay. And lactate threshold occurs here. We'll call that at 55%. Okay. I train, right? And one of two things could happen, but they both actually happen. So when I train, VO2 max goes up, okay? But it could be that VO2 max goes up and lactate threshold stays at 55% of max, even though now it's at a higher work rate. But what actually happens is it doesn't go here, it goes up, and now it's at, let's just say, 80% of max. So my max is higher, plus my lactate threshold is at a higher percentage of that max. So I can do a whole lot more work. I can make a whole lot more ATP aerobically before I make any appreciable amount of lactic acid. And part of what comes into this is we're going to make less lactate, but we're also going to, because we have more capillaries, we're actually going to be able to remove it and shuttle it better from fiber to fiber so it won't stay in our blood. Okay. That's going to be the big thing. More capillaries and mitochondria, we make less lactate at any given work rate. And then whatever we do make, we can clear a whole lot better. Okay. Of all of the things that are going to help improve your racing performance, okay, your racing performance and things that last, more than say 8 or 10 minutes, it's the ability to increase lactate threshold. It's the ability to increase how fast you can run right at your lactate threshold or right above your lactate threshold, or how fast you can cycle right at or right above your lactate threshold. Because that's the place that sets your pace. You can sustain that without fatiguing. So that area is going to be a really big thing. Okay. Okay. For Friday, there's a smart book thing. I'll try to get the rest of the lecture for the rest of the class loaded up. Okay. I'll try to have our test graded for Friday. Etc. I'll see y'all then.